And when mold meets a body that has a lot of sugar in it, it's like gasoline on a fire. It was brutal. Brutal. I'll tell you my story.
My name is Michael Rubino. I'm on a personal mission to make sure you don't get sick inside your own home.
I knew there was something wrong. I'm just so relieved there's something that you can do about it.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Never Been Sicker. Today's guest is Florence Christophers, certified health coach. I'm very excited to have her on because she's got an amazing summit coming up, which I think so many of you should actually check out. It is completely free. And Florence, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and tell people why you're here?
Okay, great. Yeah, my name is Florence. I live in Canada and I have been walking. I have struggled with sugar since I was a child, on and off. And was in my 20s. I read a book called The Sugar Blues and the light bulb went on. And I'm like, oh my goodness, my migraines, my depression, my acne, my overweight, my health crisis. It just made no sense to my doctors. Suddenly made sense. I was a little sugar junkie. I literally ate it, not atypical for, my generation. We were just starting, food companies were just starting to flood the market with all kinds of processed and junk foods, and I loved them. And I literally, when I look back now, I literally ate sugar, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and all my snacks in between, like literally. Every meal, every day. No kidding, I was sick. I just got sicker a little sooner and younger than others, but I eventually hit this wall and I read the book and I went, oh goodness, it's the food. It's the crap I'm eating. And I didn't even know what else there was to eat. It was Rice Krispies with extra sugar. It was Shreddies. It was cereals. It was toast with jam. And it was or Nutella, or it was pancakes with syrup. Like, it was just junk. That was just breakfast. I mean, I just had dessert for breakfast, and then I would have like mac and cheese or, oh Lord, just white bread and margarine, and it was just toxic. And then dinner was more junk food, fast food, McDonald's, pop, ice cream. I was totally addicted to licorice. I walked around, everyone would joke all the time, like, oh, Florence, you don't have a licorice. I'm like, where's my licorice? Like, I always was chewing on a strawberry licorice. It was insanity. I got very, very sick, and I began the journey of unhooking from sugar, discovering that it should be easier because I didn't want to be sick anymore. And I was ready to just do whatever I needed to do. And the books that I was reading, very few books, but the little books that I was starting to read were waking me up to the fact that I was probably eating myself to death into all of these issues I was facing. And it was harder than I thought it should be. I had cravings, I had withdrawal symptoms, I had headaches. When I stopped eating sugar, I got very depressed. It was awful. And I was pre-internet. There were very few books. There were no coaches. There weren't podcasts. I was really kind of out there on my own. But I started to sort of really dig into the research. And at that point in time, I was young. I was in my 20s, and I decided to go and do my master's on this topic. And it was over there in Ireland where I was doing my master's. This was about 1992, 93. And I had my own brush with a mold disaster. And when mold meets a body that has a lot of sugar in it, it's like gasoline on a fire. It was brutal. Brutal. I'll tell you my story. But so I don't know if that's enough information, but basically on again, off again, really struggling, trying to figure out, what is going on with my body. And eventually I got into recovery for sugar addiction, and I realized, it is a thing. Like, it's a thing. And I'm not alone. And there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people around the world that have joined one of the fastest growing 12-step programs on the planet. There's now 8 to 10 different programs entirely dedicated to people who will put their hand up and say, I'm a sugar junkie, totally. And we're getting recovery. And so I started to get recovery, and then I put on a summit, and then I've continued to research, and now I coach in this space. I help others make the connection between their consumption of processed junk foods, refined carbohydrates, and sugar in particular, their health issues, metabolic and mental health issues, and what we need to do to unhook and break free and restore our health.
Thank you so much for sharing all that. And, I'm sad to hear that you went through such trials and tribulations growing up, but obviously that pain has turned into a passion for you, and you're helping others, which is, such an amazing thing to do. And I appreciate you for that. The sugar is obviously a very complex topic because it is very difficult to avoid. I could say that. And I also am very interested in covering the sugar and mold connection because I have seen this too. Correlation. There seems to be some correlation there. So I'd love to get your take on that. So let's start with just the sugar in general. Why is it so hard to ditch? And why is it that you literally have withdrawal symptoms with sugar like you would, quitting alcohol or drugs?
I love that question. This is when the light bulb went on. This is when it took my breath away, and I've never been the same since I read The Sugar Blues by William Duffy. And it was available back in the late 1980s when I was looking for help with my medical crisis. And in this book, he talks about what makes sugar addictive and what links sugar to depression. And he says we take the juice of a sugar cane, or later we take the juice of sugar beets and we refine it. And he said it goes through the exact same refinement process as heroin. So heroin, so if you take the poppy seed or the poppy seed plant and there's a little white milky substance and you concentrate it, it goes from just being an innocent poppy seed or innocent milky substance from the poppy plant, and you refine it. What do you get, Michael?
Heroin.
No, you get opium.
Opium.
You get opium. And if you refine opium even more, using more technology, concentrating those psychoactive properties, alkaloids, even more, what do you get when you refine opium even more?
I need a drug history lesson here, apparently. What do you get?
You get morphine.
Morphine, okay.
And if you refine morphine to the greatest level that we are technologically capable of refining at this point in time, what do you get?
I don't know.
Heroin.
Heroin. We knew we were going to get heroin somewhere.
We knew we were going to land in heroin. So the poppy seed to heroin. So over the last 10,000 years, sugar has very slowly kind of traveled from country to country. As best as we can tell, it came over from Papua New Guinea, I believe, and kind of came over to the Middle East and then in Egypt. And each sort of country dried it and concentrated it a little bit. But it wasn't until the invention of the centrifugal turbine, late 1800s, mid 1800s, I think I have that correct, that we were able to use technology to refine morphine to heroin. And that same centrifugal turbine took molasses and dehydrated sugar and can turn it into modern day white sugar. So modern day white sugar is as concentrated as heroin, and it is as different to the sugar cane as heroin is to the poppy seed. It's just in the level of concentration. So white refined sugar is truly an opiate. It has psychoactive properties. It blasts the feel-good neurotransmitter systems in the brain. It doesn't make us high, quite like, drugs or alcohol can, but it lifts serotonin. We feel a little happier, a little more social. It boosts dopamine, so we get a little bit more driven and focused and excited. It uplifts our blood sugar, so we have this bit of flush of sugar going into our bloodstream that we can burn for flashy energy. It absolutely impacts the endorphin system, which is where it's a very, very unique as a drug, because sugar is a drug. It impacts our endorphin system, and our endorphins reduce pain. So sugar is one of those very, very special drugs that can both lift us up, make us a little high, a little happy, a little giddy, a little energized, and it can actually also suppress pain in the body, and that's both physical and psychological. And that the very first study done on that was in 1968 in Laval University in Montreal. And I don't even know who would have thought to do this, but they took these mice and they created something called separation anxiety in them. They took these little baby mice away from the mother, and they would cry. They would peep about 300 times a minute. And then they gave them sugar water and that reduced to 75 times a minute. And the researchers were like, wow, weird. It's like it's acting like an opiate. Why would sugar do that? So then what they did is they did the gold standard test to determine whether or not a substance truly acts like an opiate in the brain. And what they did is they injected these mice now with naltrexone, which blocks the opiate receptor sites. And in theory, if you take these mice that are pulled away from their mom and they have separation anxiety and they're peeping 300 times a minute, and you give them naltrexone and then you give them sugar, in theory, they should not drop down to 75 peeps a minute. They should stay at the 300, and that's what happened. So the conclusion of the paper of the research study was that for some reason, sugar appears to act like an opiate in the brain. Now, those studies have been replicated, and there's whole entire 500-page textbooks now about all the different studies that have been done that conclusively prove that sugar acts like an opiate in the brain. It is no different than any other substance of use and abuse, and that we all fall within a bell curve in terms of how addictive it is to our system. So for some people who can moderately consume alcohol is different than the individual that gets completely hijacked, and a little leads to more, leads to a lot, leads to trouble. And this really difficult journey of trying to unhook or moderate. So the same thing happens with sugar. The thing that's different about sugar is that it's in all of our foods. It's often introduced to us in utero. It's often in our baby bottles and our baby foods. So it's a drug that hooks us so young before there's any kind of consent. So it's down the road in the future, and I hope not too far off. Like all other substances of use and abuse, all other substances that are highly addictive and deeply damaging to both the brain health and our body, that we will protect children from it, that you will need to be over the age of 18 to have any refined carbohydrates, sugar in particular, added sugars in particular, go into the child's body. We protect them from alcohol. We protect them from cigarettes. We protect them from pornography. We protect them from other things shown to be, addictive. And we're not protecting children. And because of that, we have the vast majority of us to have either a mild hook or a full-on blown addiction. And there's tests that you can use that are, from the DSM, the classic substance abuse disorder classification. And we can use that to determine whether or not we fall on the tip of the bell curve where we have a full-on addiction, or if we're just a sugar abuser. And most of us are over-consuming sugar by a long shot.
And it's not just we're not even protecting them. We're literally marketing to them. I mean, we're marketing, we make baby bottles out of sugar and sell that to kids as candy, right? I mean, candy itself is all marketed to kids as like, hey, this is something, you should get as a reward, right? Totally. I mean, I think there's a lot of reprogramming there obviously needed, but I ask myself this all the time. Why are we even allowed to have this much sugar? I mean, you look at some sports drinks where they have 30, 40 grams of sugar, in a serving. And if you actually, there's this really cool TikTok I've seen recently where they showed you products and then they showed you how much white refined sugar is in that product, in an actual glass. And you're just like, oh my God, I'm literally consuming that much sugar when I drink that or when I eat that. I mean, it's crazy. And how is that allowed? Right. And
right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy when you start to think about that. So I want to ask you probably a question I'm sure you get asked a lot. Are all sugars created equal? In that regard, are there some sugars that, are safer to have? And then, the third question that I want to tack onto there is we've got all these artificial sweeteners today. And what sort of role are they playing in this, and as an alternative, is the alternative really better than the drug in the first place?
Yeah, really great questions. So I'll tackle the last ones first. So there has been a great race by all the food giants to come up with the sugar that's safe, that allows them to continue to sell products, for us to have that pleasure of sweet. We are biologically designed to love the taste of sweetness. hardwired. Even in chimpanzees and monkeys, you'll see them like gravitate towards honey and bananas and fruits. But we were meant to have that sugar come into our bodies in seasons and in the context of very dense packages of minerals and nutrients and fiber in the form of fruit, and occasionally honey, which not everyone had access to depending on the country and the season. So we were always designed to love it and to eat a lot of it, and almost even to binge it, especially in northern hemispheres. All animals that can binge fruit because it fattens them up for winter. And we did the same thing. When the peach trees and the berries were ripe, you bet we went to town because we knew there was a little window, maybe 3-4 weeks sometimes, that little, when those fruits were ripe, and it was over. It was it. It was it till spring. It was it till summer. It was it till the fall. So what's happened is just that our love of sugar has been hijacked by processed food companies that have put these very concentrated sugars in. And they have just lit up our brains and hijacked our appetites and have deeply damaged our brains and our bodies. So they've been trying to find alternatives. So we've got monk fruit, we've got stevia, we've got sucralose, Splenda, we've got aspartame, we've got, oh my gosh, there's literally, I think over 102 now, various different kinds of sugars. There's high fructose corn syrup, there's agave, there's, oh my Lord, I could go on and on and on. And there's maltodextrin, and there's all these clever, smart little ways that they've been able to get around saying the word sugar on labels, but it's just sugar. So are there better sugars? There are better sugars, and it really depends whether or not you fall into the I'm a sugar user, I'm a sugar abuser, and I'm a sugar addict, and whether or not the sugar that you have been consuming so far has created metabolic syndrome symptoms, if you have damaged your metabolism. If you have damaged your metabolism, the research that's emerging is showing that anything sweet on our tongue can make the body believe or assume, oh, sugar's coming, the insulin goes up, and then eventually that drives the sugar into the cells if we're still insulin sensitive, and then we have a low blood sugar moment and we have cravings, and that just keeps us in that cycle. Even healthier, like so-called healthier, like monk or stevia or aspartame or diet or the artificial sweeteners, not everyone's that's as sensitive to them, but many of us can be. So it's really helpful to wear a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor. And it's also really helpful to see, is it creating cravings? Are you noticing an escalation of consumption? Do you feel like, oh, I can't possibly have tea or coffee without my Splenda? Those are the signs that your body turning it into a new sort of problematic obsession, compulsion, impulsive type of, it's a problem. Like if you can take it or leave it and it's very occasional and it's a one-off treat, you're probably fine. The one sweetener that I would not touch, I really would rather starve, is aspartame. I would eat sugar over aspartame, and that says a lot. But if you watch a documentary, it's free on YouTube. It's called Sweet Misery, the story of aspartame. You will never touch it again. Never, ever. It is so damaging to the brain, and it is so addictive for many people. And they know it. I think that people secretly that are hooked into their diet pops probably know there's something, no, I shouldn't feel this way about a pop. But so if I was to say you want to do the harm reduction, you want to reduce your dependency on the real concentrated, very, very, very damaging sugars, I would stick with honey, maple syrup, stevia for some people, and monk fruit and allulose. Those are probably your safer sweeteners to use to sort of taper down. Xylitol tends to be tricky, even though it's marketed as this great safe alternative and it's good for dental health. It can cause incredible disruption at the microbiome level, and it can create some loose motions for people. I think for the most part, it's going to get phased out.
Got it. Yeah, no, that's very helpful. And obviously, what about natural sugars from things like fruits and that, all those, sugars that we get from nature, those are obviously better than, white refined sugar, I'm assuming.
Oh, totally. All whole foods. I never talk about sugar in the context of whole foods. Whole foods are good. Whole foods are good. Now, if you're metabolically damaged, you're insulin resistant, you're obese, you're diabetic, you're depressed, you have cancer, you have cardiometabolic issues, maybe you go lower carb and you occasionally eat berries and you lay low on those healthy, beautiful whole foods that get turned into sugar in the body. Maybe you lay low on those till you've sort of repaired your metabolism, and then you bring them back in. I mean, that's the goal, that we are able to consume all whole, beautiful foods in balanced portions in season. But some people have to start they do triage with sugars, like they get them, really drop them down. They stick with proteins, veggies, healthy fats, maybe some berries, occasional complex carbs. But for the most part, they stay on that meal plan. And some people go way extreme. They'll do keto. Well, I don't even think of keto as that extreme anymore. Many people do, but I think of carnivore as pretty darn extreme. And there's a whole carnivore thing going on right now. And people are getting really great results. They're like, I'm just going to get rid of all carbs. I'm just not even going to negotiate with them at all. They have some pretty great transformations. Not true for everybody, but it can be true for many. I've had clients that never, ever felt better, ever. Like just getting them all out, the plants. And then they slowly reintroduce them. Hopefully they do all the repair work that needs to happen. They slowly reintroduce them and they become how we were meant to be, able to consume all healthy whole foods in balance and moderation and in season and be just fine.
So now we talked a lot about sugar. And one tricky thing about sugar is carbs, because carbs turn into sugar. And so how does carbs play a role in this in terms of damaging our, microbiome and our metabolism? And what do we need to do to, have a healthier lifestyle in terms of trying to avoid certain carbs and maybe change our diet a bit?
Yeah. Carbs have no whole food has ever been the enemy, ever. Carbs have never been an enemy. Do they have different impacts on the body than proteins, animal proteins and vegetables and healthy fats? Sure. But there are lots of cultures that have been pretty high carb consumers, like India, Asia, South America. Tons of the countries of Africa have had very high carbohydrate diets. And there's plenty of evidence that they were healthy until the refined carbohydrates came in, damaged their metabolism, and now they're very carb sensitive. So how to move forward? I teach everybody something called the 3-meal miracle. I pulled it from my 12-step food addiction recovery years. It's basically 3 meals, no snacks, whole foods only. Pick a protein, some vegetables, a healthy fat, and then a complex carb if you're at your goal weight or you're not overly metabolically damaged. If you're metabolically damaged, it can benefit you to drop the complex carbs, maybe for 2 of your 3 meals, and just let the miracles happen. It's just unbelievable what can be reversed. Diabetes, depression, bipolar, cardiovascular, anxiety, just incredible. Like almost everything you can think of that's a chronic disease, that's lifestyle related, that's diet related, can be reversed through the healing power of whole foods. Now, some people have to kind of tweak. I teach everyone to kind of come up the middle. Everything's in balance. Some people might go far left and decide to be whole food plant-based, do the more vegan path. Some people might go more like keto, paleo, carnivore. Awesome. As long as you're eating whole foods, you're not eating the processed junk foods, you're going to be able to figure out what whole foods work for you and what macro ratios. A lot of experimentation. Everyone experiments. No one, I suppose there's always an outlier who they just landed on the perfect meal plan for them right off the hop. That isn't the case for the majority of us. We're playing with the macros and we're figuring out what's the right meal plan for us. And then the healing happens. It just happens.
Yeah, I mean, I can attest to that myself. I mean, I recently just lost 20 pounds. A couple of years ago, I lost 40 pounds. I mean, my weight unfortunately fluctuates. I get exposed to mold quite a bit, which I'm excited to kind of dive into that side of things and see how this all relates. But, it's, depending on, where you're at in life. I mean, I feel like I may have damaged my metabolism from a multitude of environmental toxins and the way I might have drank like a fish in college and maybe ate too much fast food around that time. Who knows? But when I look at it from this perspective, there seems to be a profound connection between too many carbs, too much sugar, and mold exposure. So you had your own mold story, and I think we might be able to connect some dots there. Do you mind sharing?
Yeah, so I went over to Ireland and I entered into a graduate student residence that was an old building, very old, hundreds of years. And in our dining room, our kitchen dining room area, during the rainy season, which was about 3 or 4 months of the year, the entire far wall would be covered in mold. It was a brick wall, and it was an old brick wall, and you would have to see it to believe it, but the entire brick wall was covered in an entire layer of mold that would stick out. And we would pull, it was so gross. We all were like, it's so gross. And we just pulled it. We were 20 something, so naive. We just pulled the dining room table away from it, and no one sat too close to the wall, and we didn't think anything of it. But people got sick, and I was one of them. There were 2 or 3 people actually had to leave the building. No one ever mentioned mold. We had absolutely no idea. We thought it was a little gross, but we didn't actually realize what an extraordinary health threat it was. So for me, when I got over to Ireland, I was overwhelmed. It was a new country. I was starting my master's, and for lots of reasons, when I relapse or slip or get back into the sugar ditch, it's usually in those transitions, when there's sort of high stress. So I had gone back to sugar on and off, in and out a little bit. So it was the double whammy of this daily exposure to mold, not even hidden, and my, escalating, sort of relapse around sugar consumption. And it started very slow for me. I started to get more headaches. I just kind of felt tired. I felt off. And then it escalated to a skin condition that you've probably heard of and you're probably familiar with, rosacea. I am 26, 25, 24, something like that. And I start to develop this very red face. And it was very odd. And it was and it came on pretty quick. Like, we're talking within months. And eventually I started to go to doctors, and they're like, oh, we'll get this sorted out. And this doctor and multiple doctors were trying to work with me. I was working with Chinese medical doctors, mainstream medical doctors. They were prescribing antibiotics that was sort of improving it. And then I met the doctor from London who was trying to open up a new clinic in Dublin, and he was calling. So he'd gone to the university to say, hey, does anyone want to be free subjects so that I can get testimonials for Dublin? So I signed up, and he's like, no problem, we'll get this sorted. He couldn't get it sorted. It was getting worse and worse. It went from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3 to stage 4. And at stage 4, my master's was done, and I'd gone back to Canada, and I started to consult with medical experts there. And they're like, how is this possible that you have stage 4 rosacea at the age of 20? People don't get this till they're 60 or 70 or 80. What is going on? At stage 4, the doctors are telling me this is incurable. You are going to go blind. You will be on antibiotics for months, maybe years. And I was. The longest I would go 8 months of daily antibiotics to try and deal with this. Now, let me tell you what stage 4 rosacea is like. My face was swollen like a purple moon. It was a deep, rich purple. And the only parts of me that were white were my eyes, and I looked like a raccoon. And I had hundreds of little pimples all over my face, hundreds. And they would ooze and pus, so I couldn't wear makeup. I'm in my mid-20s. Can you imagine? It was absolutely traumatic for me. And I would wake up in the morning, and I'd have to always just gingerly take my face off the pillow because it was always crusted and stuck to the pillow, and there'd be little bits of blood. I'm going blind. I can't wear makeup. I'm not dating. I feel absolutely disgusting. In fact, it was so bad, Michael, so bad, that I was in the grocery store buying vegetables, and there was a child probably about 3 or 4 years old that had looked up and saw my face and shrunk back into her mother and started crying and pointing at me saying, like, what's wrong with her face? What's wrong with her face? Like, it was terrible. And everything, Michael, this went on for, I was 24, and I didn't enter into recovery for food addiction till I was about 36, 12 years, no reprieve. Everything I tried. People would stop me in the streets and say, oh, honey, oh, that looks so sore. Have you ever tried oatmeal masks? Have you ever tried this? Like, all these suggestions. I went to experts. They did scans. No one ever talked about the mold, and no ever to this day. And no one ever talked about Later, someone made the connections. Functional medical doctors and naturopaths made the connections, but long after I had sort of resolved my rosacea. But at that point, when I was 36, I went into treatment. I went into a program to help me with sugar addiction. And it was about 6 months. By 90 days, there was a dramatic improvement in my skin. At around the 6-month mark, my skin, I had absolutely no makeup on. It was completely clear. And I drove from a meeting where I talked about my journey of recovery from food addiction, sugar addiction. And I went to Walmart and got a photo because I thought this is the happiest day of my life. I never, ever, ever thought this would get healed or resolved. But it did. But it took 3 to 6 months of zero junk food, no refined carbohydrates, 3 meals, no snacks, hydration. Like, it wasn't a quick fix. This mold, for me, when it got into my system, mold meeting sugar, a bad diet, it was so difficult to resolve.
Yeah, I think a lot of people listening to this will resonate with you on the fact that this journey, it could be long, it could be arduous, and the fix, it's not overnight. It could take months, 3 to 6 months. But you put it in this perspective of, 12 years of suffering. You were able to reverse 12 years of struggle in 3 to 6 months. It's not like it took you 12 years to reverse those 12 years, right? And so that's the hope and the light at the end of the tunnel, is actually the fact that these things can be fixed. You can heal. I mean, that's the amazing part of this. And yeah, it's not going to be overnight, but if you put in the work for 3 to 6 months, which, I'm not saying it's easy, because, we're talking about an addiction here. And I think many people, including myself, have dealt with this addiction one way or another. I mean, I'm currently, literally staying away from sugar and refined carbohydrates, and probably I think I'm in a hybrid of a keto and carnivore diet myself right now.
Mm-hmm.
But it's rewarding, and look, I've been doing this round, I'll call it round, because this time it has to become a lifestyle change for me, without a doubt.
Mm-hmm.
This time it's been, I'd say, probably about 3 months so far. I've lost about 20 pounds, as I mentioned earlier, and that equates to about a 2 pound a week average. Is kind of what I've been going at, and I'm doing it for many different reasons, right? I think the primary reason is I'm trying to reboot myself. And in this reboot, what I'm trying to accomplish is I'm trying to make sure that, I have more fat cells. When you have more fat cells, you have more opportunity for things to be stored in those fat cells, right? Like toxins. And I'm trying to essentially just make sure that I've got 2 small kids. I want to be around, long into my life when these kids grow up. And I know that I have to start now. I can't wait till I'm 70 years old and then, have all this damage that I'm trying to reverse at that point. I mean, I'm trying to reverse the damage that I created in my lifetime now, while I'm in my 30s, approaching my 40s. And the reason I'm doing that is because, listen, I know that I ate sugar growing up. I mean, I could tell you that when I was a kid, my parents thought I was too skinny, and they mistakenly, at the advice of a doctor, if you could believe this, they mistakenly gave me ice cream inside of smoothies, like made protein sugar smoothies to give to me. Now, I did that every day. It was like peanut butter, ice cream, milk. Okay, that was the smoothie, if you can imagine that. And of course I gained weight. I gained weight pretty rapidly. But at 12 years old, I had already damaged my body at that point, right? And so go on to that and struggling with all these different things from 12 years old to now at 36 years old. I mean, it's 24 years of yo-yoing and trying to figure out life. And all the while, I did what probably so many other people do. Oh, let's get rid of sugar and let's switch to, I don't know, Splenda, right? Then when Splenda first came out, okay, we'll just have more Splenda. And, okay, instead of white bread, I'll have wheat bread, right? And you you make all these changes based upon the science at the time, or let's just get rid of the word science. Let's say the marketing at the time. And where did that leave me? Well, it left me 24 years later. Look where I'm at. I'm in the same position for the past 24 years, trying to figure out what works for me so that I could have a lifestyle. And so I'm really excited for your summit to come out, because I think, the amount that I've learned just asking you some of these questions here on this podcast has been invaluable. And I can imagine that, you're going to have hours and hours worth of content there to kind of cipher through. This is important, because take it from me, maybe mold might be a confusing subject to most people. And for me, it's not. But I'll tell you, when it comes to food and sugar and carbs and just how to have the right diet, that's a subject very confusing to me, because there has been so much conflicting information put out there. There's been, just look at the damn food table, for instance, right? Think about all the stuff we have been marketed to and sold down the river. And it's really hard to kind of come to terms with that. And for so many people like myself, the damage is already done. And now having to undo all this damage. And it's probably going to take me a year, maybe 2. But you know what? 2 years to undo 24 years worth of damage, I'm okay with that.
Yeah. And 2 years from now, you will have a self that's 2 years older 2 years from now. And is that person, even though it took a long time to sort of repair the brain and the metabolism and the gut and all those things that we have to do slowly, you might as well at least be healthier 2 years from now. Like, even though I'm not doing this justice, this thought of like a year from now, let me just say, a year from now, who would you be and how would you feel if you started on the journey of unhooking from these refined carbohydrates, all these ultra processed foods in our food supply, and we're just increasingly eating more whole foods, doing better self-care, creating a new lifestyle?
Exponential, because I could tell you how I feel in the 3 months, And I've been down this road before. Just to be candid, I've been down this road before. This is not the first time that I've all right, I got to get my stuff together and get in shape, and and this is important. I need to be healthier. We know what I do for a living. I go into people's homes. They're moldy. We know they're moldy, right? I do the best I can to protect myself. At the end of the day, it's like there are certain things that, unfortunately, I do. There are certain things I'm exposed to. And, at the end of the day, I try to rationalize, like so many people probably try to do. And I try to say, well, I've been good, for 3 months. I can have a slice of pizza. I've been good for, X amount of days. I can have this. And, I can't tell you how often I've went into the deep end, right? Like that one slice of pizza turns into 2, turns into 3. Next thing you know, it's the next day. I'm like, okay, I'll be good today. But then I was good today. I could have a slice of carrot cake, whatever, right? And so that one weekend of celebrating my success, it just kind of compounds. And it's just because when you think about it, like all this stuff converting back into sugar, you already talked about how that makes the human body feel. Well, yeah, it feels good, right? You feel like you're being rewarded for something. And the problem is that that's really just the effects of those drugs taking shape. And just like if you were to take any drug, yeah, you're going to feel good, right? Well, if you didn't, why would people ever take drugs? And so the reality of the situation is that feel good, that becomes like a thing that I'm chasing, essentially. Which is why I would ever want to have a slice of pizza again, because I'd be chasing the feeling of the first slice of pizza I ever had, right? And all those endorphins and that dopamine that kicks in. The problem is that you never really can ever duplicate that feeling. That's why binge eating happens and all those things. The second thing is, it's not good. And so I know for me, you mentioned this personality of like somebody that can just have a drink or have a candy bar or a slice of pizza and then be fine. For me, unfortunately, it's not always the case, because I need to get to that point, but I should be able to have a slice of pizza and be fine. I should be able to have a candy bar and be fine. For sugar, it's actually funny for me. It's probably more the carbs than the sugar. Like I'm not as addicted to sugar as I am addicted to carbs, I would say.
Yeah,
But
like the
like,
flour products, starchy,
yeah,
like
like,
potato chips, bread,
oh
pasta,
yeah.
pizza. Yeah.
Like, I could have, I'm the type of person, I can't just have like a Cheez-It,
Right.
I'm going to have like 10 handfuls of Cheez-Its if I have one, and so
Mhm.
that's probably more my problem, I would
Mhm.
say, in terms of that. And it's like, trying to just make sure that the trick is just don't buy that crap and don't have it around. Right. But yeah, I mean, for everybody it's different. Like my wife, she loves chocolate. So I think her issue would be chocolate, whereas mine would be Cheez-Its or something to that effect.
Mhm.
But we all have our different strokes, if you will. The problem that remains for me though is like I just need to not have it. And maybe there'll be a time, maybe years from now or months from now or whatever it may be, that I can be more in control. But for now, I can't. And I know that one time turns into two times, turns into three times. Next thing you know, I'm right back to the lifestyle that was damaging in the first place. And so a lot of it started with alcohol, being in college. Those shakes, obviously, when I was 12. And then as I kind of broke through that cycle in college, it was alcohol, being around alcohol all the time. And then getting fast food at 2 a.m. after drinking alcohol was a staple. And that happened for many years. And then it was coming out of that. And now is, when pretty much when my wife got pregnant, I have two kids. I use that as a glorified excuse to have my own set of cravings, like as if I was carrying the baby. Right. And so I don't know if there's any men out there that have experienced something like that when their wives are pregnant. But for me, I would just say I use that as an excuse. Like, oh, okay, well, she had strange cravings, pickles and ice cream, like, that is, as you can hear, as a stereotype. Well, I was like, yeah, I'll have ice cream 7 times a day. Sure. Yeah, I'll have this, I'll have that. Right. And so what did that do? Well, it became damaging for me all over again going into fatherhood. And so, it's, I'm acknowledging these things. And one of the reasons why I was so excited to have you on here was to kind of share this. Like I have experienced these same damn struggles that you might be experiencing listening to this. And so, I think it's important to be vulnerable and real with one another and help each other kind of through these struggles. And the tools that you have to help people through these struggles, I'm very excited to check out on this summit. And do you mind telling people when the summit is and where they can go and all that fun stuff?
Absolutely. So I'm just about to do my 10th annual. It's called the Kick Sugar Summit. So kicksugarsummit.com. And this is the metabolic health edition. So we've got like over 50 experts that are going to share the science. Some of it like really new that helps you to really understand the link between these ultra processed foods and sugar and chronic diseases of all kinds. And it really, you can hear from one person, you can hear from Michael, you might hear from me, but when you hear from 50 speakers, one after another, doctor, scientist, PhD, Harvard, Oxford, you name it, and they say the same message. And the message is this, that almost all of us are over-consuming and struggling to reduce, if not eliminate, our consumption of sugar and ultra-processed foods. We all know we need to do it. That used to be not on mainstream news. It's everywhere. Everybody knows it now. We need to reduce, if not eliminate, those processed fast food, junk foods. But very few of us are actually getting anywhere close to the suggested target of no more than 6 added teaspoons of sugar a day for women and no more than 9 for men. And to put that into perspective, that's actually a single granola bar can blow you over your daily limit, right? Or like 2 hamburger buns, like a hamburger bun can put you over 6 to 9 teaspoons of added sugar. There's that much sugar in them. It's very little. The margin of safety for sugar is extremely small. So the message is this, of every expert on my summit is this, that we vastly underestimate the damage these foods are doing to our bodies, and every consumption does damage, no exception. It always does damage. Small, minute, hard to tell at first, but it will eventually accumulate. And we vastly overestimate pharmaceutical solutions. We just think if we have a health condition or a chronic disease, we put way more faith in pharmaceuticals being able to solve the problem than we do the power of whole foods, the healing power of whole foods. And we got that backwards. And when you really are persuaded to at least give it a try, like I did, no doctor that ever treated me would have ever guessed that going on a low carbohydrate, whole food diet only, no snacks, no junk, would completely heal stage 4 rosacea. And it did. People reverse diabetes. I have 2 speakers this year on the summit, both of them men in their 30s. Actually, Matt's in his 20s, I believe, that were severe bipolar mental health issues. Matt had been hospitalized 4 times for psychotic episodes. His family is the founder of the Bazooki Foundation. Very wealthy, successful family that invests millions of dollars in research on a variety of different philanthropic topics. They threw everything at their son, Matt, everything. Every expert, psychology, treatments, everything they could try and support their son who was struggling, and nothing worked. At one point, he was on 29, they tried 29 different medications over 5 years. And in the end, he was on 5 different medications just to stabilize him. And he was just a zombie. He wasn't really a happy kid. He wasn't really a thriving kid, but he was stable. And then one day someone suggested the book called Brain Energy by Dr. Chris Palmer. He's a psychiatrist out of Harvard who was making the connection between metabolic health and mental health. And of course, both of those are impacted by sugar profoundly. Sugar impacts our metabolic health, which impacts our mental health. And they tracked down his book and they tracked down the doctor and he put him on a keto diet. And today I interviewed Matt. Matt has a happy life. He wakes up happy. He's been in nutritional ketosis. I think he's going on year 4 at this point, and it's a miracle. And miracles happen all the time, not through incredibly genius medical interventions like surgeries or new medications. It's this simple act of unhooking from the processed junk foods and falling in love and leveraging the power of healing, the healing power of whole foods. It's way more than I can imagine, and you have to live it to believe it. But the summit is the place to start if you have a medical condition of any kind and you are wanting to reduce, if not eliminate, medications. If you're wanting to reverse it, if you want to prevent it, this is the summit for you. So it starts on October 7th. So a few weeks from now, I don't know when this is going to air, and it's 100% free. Every single person on this summit donates their time. It is a labor of love. It is a nonprofit event. It is an international educational event. And we're hoping to have over 100,000 people join us this year. Really, there should be millions. I just don't know how to reach them. So our request is that you join the summit for free. You learn what you can, you take what you can, and then pay it forward. Tell someone else. Make changes in your family. Make changes at work. Make changes at your daycare. Make changes in your senior center. Pay it forward. This has to happen fast, and it needs to spread. And this is going to happen at a grassroots level. If we wait for governments, it's going to be slow.
Yeah. Amen to that. I mean, being in the air quality space and helping persuade governments to change laws, it's a slow and arduous process. We did pass one law a couple weeks ago in Illinois. It took 2 years, though, right, to get our first bill to pass. We still have 49 different states in the U.S. to go after. We still have the world to tackle. I mean, it takes a long time. But you know what doesn't take a long time? Informing yourself. Power is knowledge, and making the right decisions for you and your family. Now that takes no time at all. So I think it's really important that, you check this out. Florence, I want to thank you so much for coming on here today, sharing your story, talking about how, the impacts that sugar has with mold exposure. I think that's, and obviously refined carbohydrates. I think that's really important. A lot of people listening to this are dealing with mold exposure. They might not have as clean of a diet, if they're being really honest and vulnerable, as they should. And this could be, just that missing link to help them reach that next level of health and well-being. And so thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for sharing the information on this free, amazing summit. And thank you for all you're doing.
Pleasure, Michael. Thanks for having me.